Howdy folks, welcome back to World of Tanks with the Mighty Jingles. Today it is once again time for a tank review. We're going to be looking at the Chinese Tier 8 heavy tank, the 110. The review will follow the usual format. We'll take a look at it in the garage first, have a look at the stats, see what kind of grind it's going to be to get this thing fully upgraded, and then we'll jump straight into the battles. If you don't want to waste time listening to me talking about the tank and you just want to get straight to the violent bits, then link in the video description, and also if you have annotations enabled, click the link that's popping up on screen right now and that will jump straight to the violent parts of the video. As for everybody else, let's take a look at this tank. The thing that you have to bear in mind when you're looking at the Chinese heavy tanks in World of Tanks is that most of them never actually existed, with the exception of the IS-2, small numbers of which were exported to China from the Soviet Union after the Second World War, and some of which actually saw combat service during the Korean War. But with the exception of the IS-2, none of the Chinese heavy tanks existed beyond the prototype stage. And the reason for that is actually pretty straightforward. Beginning 10 years before the start of the Second World War, and all the way throughout the Second World War, China was being systematically wrecked by Japan. And then when the Second World War ended, and the Chinese Civil War kicked off, the situation didn't get any better. And it took a long time after the end of the Chinese Civil War, when the communists came to power, for China to be able to actually re-establish any kind of heavy manufacturing industry of the kind that was needed to support domestic tank production. And by the time China was actually in a position to start building its own tanks, nobody was building or designing heavy tanks anymore. They'd fallen out of favour. Main battle tanks ruled the battlefield now. Tanks like the Type 59, tanks like the T-54 and the Centurion. Main battle tanks had guns every bit as good as the guns you could get on a heavy tank, but they were faster, they were more manoeuvrable, they were cheaper to build, and you just got more bang for your buck out of a main battle tank. And so the whole idea of Chinese heavy tank production never went beyond the blueprint or prototype stage. Now, you could be forgiven at first glance looking at the 110 for thinking that it was nothing more than a straightforward Chinese copy of the IS-3. You'd actually be wrong. The 110 was actually developed from Russian design work into upgrading and extending the life of the IS-2. Now this work never went anywhere in Russia because the IS-3 came along, and while relations were still good between the Soviet Union and China, the Soviet engineers passed all of that design work onto China as a sort of, here you go, get started on building your own, here's some work that we've done, because China already had the IS-2, and the Soviet engineers thought that they could make something of this development work by upgrading their IS-2 into what we now know in World of Tanks as the 110. So that's the background of the tank. What's it actually like in World of Tanks? You know, it's not bad. This is, certainly in my opinion anyway, this is a pretty good Tier 8 heavy tank. It's unusual in that it doesn't have one of those great big dirty Russian 122mm guns. Well, it does. The first two guns on this tank are your standard Russian 122mm D25T derivatives. But the big gun on this tank is actually a 100mm gun. Seeing that choice of gun as the top level gun on the 110 actually quite surprised me when this tank was first introduced. You're definitely expecting one of those big Russian 122 mils, and yet that 100mm gun is actually one of the best features on the tank. What you're actually getting with this gun is a Tier 9 medium tank gun. So let's have a look at the Chinese Tier 9 medium tank, and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. And there it is, there's the Chinese Tier 9 medium, the WZ-120, with exactly the same gun. On the WZ-120 you get 7.32 rounds per minute, 215mm of penetration, 265 with premium ammunition, 320 average damage, 0.38 accuracy, 2.9 second aiming time. The aiming time is the drawback on this gun. 2.9 seconds is pretty bad. But what's the difference between that gun right there on the WZ-120 and the same gun a tier lower on the 110? The only difference is the 110 gets 6 rounds per minute instead of 7.32. Other than that, it's identical performance. Of course, nobody's going to be comparing this tank to a Tier 9 medium. Most people are going to want to know how it stacks up against its most obvious competitor, the IS-3, with that 122mm BL-9 gun. And it does actually compare quite favourably. The BL-9 obviously has the edge in alpha damage, 390 versus 320, and it does have slightly better penetration. But in every other respect, this 100mm gun is better. While it might not have the outright alpha damage, it has a substantially better rate of fire, so it has higher damage per minute. It's also more accurate, and while the 2.9 second aiming time is the big drawback on this gun, it's actually a better aiming time than that of the BL9 on the IS-3. Okay, so it's got a good gun. What's the armour like? Well, it's not bad actually, although the armour on this tank is all at the front of the tank. If you can keep the front of this tank pointed towards the enemy and, ideally, cover up that big pike lower glacis, then this tank is rock solid. Looking at the 110, it does kind of resemble an IS-3 that's been squeezed in from the sides and has gotten taller as a result. But the comparatively low profile of the IS-3 can actually work against it because the IS-3 has a weak spot on the top of the turret. And what that means is that tanks that are taller than the IS-3, and most tanks are taller than the IS-3, can actually, from the front, shoot down into the top of the turret of the IS-3 and cause the driver all kinds of problems. You don't get that on the 110. That weak spot just isn't there. The 110 trades that in for an easily penetrated commander's cupola. Although I say easily penetrated, it's not that big a target, and as long as you keep the tank moving, it can be very, very hard to hit. From the side, it's a different story. There's none of that troll-spaced side armour above the tracks that you get on the IS-3. The source of endless rage and frustration in World of Tanks when you manage to get around the flank of an IS-3, you unload a shot into him and it just goes nowhere, eaten up by that spaced armour. There's none of that with a 110. If the 110 cannot keep its front pointed towards its enemy, it's going to have problems. It's also one of the more mobile of the heavy tanks in the game. It's got a good top speed, 40 km per hour, although the engine is a little anemic. It's a 580 horsepower engine in a 50+ ton tank, but that's not bad. And being able to do 40 km per hour and having all of that frontal armour means that this tank is very, very good if it can get the speed up at ramming, mediums and lights. So, other than the weak side and rear armour, it seems like a pretty capable Tier 8 heavy tank. Are there any downsides that we haven't covered? There are two. And one of them is that there is a sort of, well, what we call a shot trap at the front of the tank. What's a shot trap? Well, it's exactly as the name suggests. It's something that traps shots. If you're taking fire from the front in the 110 and a shot strikes the gun mantlet underneath the gun, it will ricochet straight down into that flat section of armour that is actually the driver's viewport. It will go right through, it will kill the driver, and it will cause damage to the tank. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, you'll be sorry. The tank also seems to have very, very fragile fuel tanks. It does seem to get set on fire quite often, so I wouldn't recommend skimping on the fire extinguisher. As far as the research grind of the tank is concerned, well, there's some good news and there's some bad news. First, the good news. The radio will carry over from the IS-2. Also, the engine will carry over from the IS-2. And the first gun upgrade will also carry over from the IS-2. And that's where the good news ends. Your upgrade path on this tank should be first the suspension. You have to research the suspension before you can fit anything else. Next, get the turret. The turret is a good solid upgrade. It not only gives you much, much better armour, it also gives the tank more health, and it boosts the view range by 30 meters. And then the real grind begins, because you now have to grind out 59,000 experience to unlock the 100mm gun, and you have to do it using this. And this tank fights tier 10s. Yep, it's that 122mm D25T again, Chinese flavoured this time, with the 175mm of penetration, horrendous accuracy, and an aiming time that's measured in days rather than seconds. There is a bright side, of course, at least you're using the Chinese flavour of this gun, that gives you the option of using high explosive anti-tank premium ammunition with 250mm of penetration, as opposed to the original Russian flavour of this gun, which IS-3 drivers have to do, that has premium APCR ammunition that only has 217mm of penetration. So, there's that. So, that's the 110 explained, and in under 9.5 minutes as well. These garage reviews are just getting faster and faster. Okay, let's take this thing out for a spin. First replay, as usual, it's me noobing it up again, and then I'll show you a couple of other replays of people who actually know what they're doing. It's a tier 8 maximum game on highway, so first thing you do, have a look at the enemy team list. What do they have? Well, we seem to have more of the tier 8 heavies. They've got 2 tier 8 heavies, an IS-3 and a T-34, but we've got 4 tier 8 heavies, so we should have the upper hand going into the town, which is the usual stomping ground of heavy tanks here on the highway map. Now, as far as the top speed of this tank is concerned, That 40 kilometers per hour is, well, it's not a speed limit the way it is on certain other tanks. I can do 44 kilometers per hour going down this hill. Imagine the ramming potential of this tank. It's 50 plus tons travelling at over 40 kilometers per hour with all of that frontal armour and that big wicked looking pike nose. This thing is going to wreck lights and mediums if it hits travelling at any kind of speed. Now, for tanks spawning on this side of the map, this used to be the most dangerous part of the game when you were on highway, but several patches back they did remodel the map to give the tanks that start on my end of the map a much more even chance of actually being able to win by extending the amount of concealment and cover and the terrain features that enabled you to actually get into the town without being on half health by the time you got there from tank destroyers and sniping heavies sitting up at the entrance to the town from the other team's spawn. We do of course have a VK2801 right up front. Who thinks he's going to be the first one to die? Come on, place your bets. What are you doing there in a light tank? I mean, seriously. Now, there's a Jagdpanther 2 up there. And I really don't want to get shot on the side by him, so I'm trying to get across this gap before it's too late. Oh, there goes the VK2801. Who saw that one coming? Anyway, can I get shots? Yeah, I think I can. Bingo, got him. And let's pull back. If I was facing him head on, I could probably bounce a shot from the Jagdpanther 2 at that kind of range from the front, but not angled like that. And I was reloading anyway, so why give him the opportunity to do any kind of damage to me? Now, what else is going on? Tiger's just overtaken, and we've got a 112 on the side road up there, leading straight up to the enemy base. 112, obviously, the Chinese Tier 8 premium heavy tank. I'll take a 110 over a 112 any day of the week. I really don't like that tank. The gun is terrible. The frontal armour is all right, but the lower glacis is easily penetrated. It's just not a very good tank. But, well, he's managed to hit and set that IS on fire, and I do manage to get some damage in before he burns to death, and the 112 gets the kill anyway, so it's all good. I didn't kill Steel. He still got the kill. He still did his damage. Now, we've got slightly tougher opposition here. There's an IS-3 up there. There's a whole bunch of tanks up there, including a KV-3. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Oh dear, Mr. KV-3, you really didn't want to do that. And BL9 gun. It's better penetration than my gun, but from the front, you really do want to avoid the temptation to try to angle the armour of the 110. That pike nose pre-angles the armour for you. It did look like the IS-3 was trying to hit my lower glacis, but he just didn't give it time to aim. Came around the corner, snapped the shot. Horrible aiming time on the IS-3. It missed, did no damage. And now, of course, he's in all kinds of trouble because, well, he's not trying to side scrape around the corner, and instead we're able to just put shot after shot into his inside drive wheel, keep him immobilised, do damage, and he can't get the gun around the corner of the building, so he's completely unable to defend himself. And now it's just turned into a complete rout. We've completely got them on the run, and me and this 112 are just jockeying each other, trying to be the one to get the next kill. Who are we going to go for? KV-1S? KV-1S? Oh, KV-3. Yeah, I'll get the KV-3. Can I also get the KV-1S? Don't forget, this gun reloads a hell of a lot faster than the 112's gun. Yeah, no, 112 gets the KV-1S. Okay, I'll get the T69. Well, I'll get a shot into him. And then Sir Foch, in the Lerva, he gets the T69. And now it's a clear run into the enemy base. The Jagdpanther 2, somebody else got him, he's done. This game is all but over. These were, of course, absolutely ideal conditions to be driving the 110 in. I mean, I only got shot at once, and that did no damage. I'm a top-tier heavy tank with very, very strong frontal armour. I was able to keep the front of the tank pointed at the enemy at all times, keep the gun working, at least up until now. Now there's suddenly nothing left to shoot at. And I was a top-tier tank, so of course, you know, you expect to be able to get this kind of result in this tank. Rapidly running out of things to shoot at. Can I get any more damage done before this game's over? Oh, 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 scumbag, scumbag, scumbag. Ah! Oh, that's it. I don't care if I don't kill anything else now. I've achieved my aim. One of those games where the team just steamrolled the opposition. Nobody on the enemy team did more than 1,000 damage, and everybody on our team did some damage, aside from the very unfortunate T150 and the VK2801 driver who thought he was in a VK4502 and was the first to die. I actually came second on damage done here, 62 points behind the 112 who came first, thanks to a very unfortunate IS that he managed to set on fire right at the beginning of the game. But I can tell you're not convinced, and I haven't really given you much reason to be convinced. I mean, obviously I was going to be able to do well with that kind of matchmaking and that kind of map in the previous replay. So here to change your mind is Mr. Storms. He's driving the 110 on El Haluf, and while it is still a tier 8 maximum match, and there is no artillery this time, there's a lot of tier 8s on the enemy team. There's a lot of tier 8 heavies on the enemy team. And he is pretty much going to fight all of them. So in the interest of keeping things moving swiftly along, we're going to skip ahead to the part where he first comes under fire from, well, half of the enemy team. And here it comes. Now he's going to get spotted as he breaks cover through this gap, but nobody's going to be able to get a shot off at him. That top speed does come in handy. T69 up in front, IS-3 over to the right, laying up in cover and putting some mostly ineffective fire into all of these enemy heavies. He's got the platoon of IS-6s, he's got both the IS-3s, the T-29s there, he's got a couple of tier 6 heavies, the KV-85, the T-150, the Tiger 2's back there somewhere as well. In fact, the only tier 8 heavy that isn't up here is the AMX-5100. Now, pay attention to the first penetrating shot that hits Mr. Storms' tank. It's one of the IS-6s that fires it, and he uses regular credit armor-piercing ammunition with 175mm of penetration, and there it is. There. Hit the cupola. What makes this all the more amusing is that is the first and only shot that any of these guys fire at his weak spots. They can't hit his lower glacis because he's around a corner and there's a rock in the way, and because of the way he's angled the tank, he's able to keep the front pointed at them anyway. You don't want to be angling the front. I mean, I said because of the way he's angling the tank. Because of the way he's not angling the tank, he's given them all kinds of problems anyway. So he's only really showing the turret front. And in that kind of situation, well, if it was in an IS-3, they could put shots into the turret top weak spot. But he's not in an IS-3, so they have to aim for his cupolas. And they don't. One of those IS-6s, the one right in this corner, is at least side-scraping around the corner, trying to make the most of his armour. Of course, all he's doing there is getting in the way of the tanks behind him, and the IS-6 does have strong armour, but when you're side-scraping like that, you're exposing a major weakness. One of those right there, you see where he keeps shooting him, over and over and over. If you side-scrape around a corner in an IS-6, that section of armour on the cheek, if you like, of the upper glacis becomes flat, and especially at point-blank range where you're shooting down into it, it offers almost no armour protection. And that's exactly where Storms is shooting these guys, over and over and over. And because he's using the 100mm gun, which has a significantly faster rate of fire than, for example, well, the 122mm gun that all of those IS-6s are using, or the BL9 122mm gun on the IS-3, he is able to put a shot into them each and every time they come around this corner. To be completely fair to those IS-6 drivers, one of them is at least making an effort at trying to hit the commander's and machine gun hatch on the top of this tank, but Storms keeps the tank moving, so he's not making it easy for him, and every time that guy tries to side-scrape around the corner, Storms keeps hitting him in exactly the same spot, and it's penetrating almost with every shot he fires. Because when you side-scrape around a corner in an IS-6 like that, the inside of the cheek of the upper glacis armour becomes flat, and you lose most of the sloping, and so it's easy for him to penetrate with this 217mm of regular credit armour piercing ammunition. Storms has got some APCR, he hasn't needed to use any of it yet. And before too long, these guys in the IS-6s are going to start getting upset, and so they're going to start loading the gold ammunition. And they don't need to. They've already managed to penetrate his tank, firing regular 122mm ammunition from the IS-6's main gun, and it only has 175mm of penetration because they hit him in a weak spot. Here they come, they've loaded the gold, bang, there it is, bang, there it is. Now they were able to penetrate him because he has angled the tank, so instead he just straightens it out, and now even the APCR just starts bouncing, because they're not aiming for those weak spots. They're just loading the gold and trying to derp their way through the front of his armour, and all of the armour on this tank is at the front. And so Storms has basically managed to hold these guys, almost all of the tier 8 heavy tanks in the enemy team. He's managed to hold them all off, with some assistance from his team, for so long that the rest of his team have managed to work their way around them. Now he's got them caught in a crossfire, so he's just going to finally brave the corner, finish off the last IS-6. And that guy's jimmies have just been severely rustled. He's going to have a few words to say in chat about how he feels about that. We'll just stop to kill the T-37. There we go. 110 OP. Well, every tank in the game's overpowered if all you're going to do is just blast away at its strongest armour, you cack-handed fail monkey. I'm afraid brute force ignorance and gold ammunition will only carry you so far. You actually have to know where to shoot, and those guys didn't. Wait until you see where all their shots went. I'll show you in a moment. First of all, he's got more tanks to kill. Game's not over yet, and yeah, it's only a T-150. It's not much of a threat. What guns are he using? It looks like he's got the 107mm. It's not a terrible gun. And this isn't a great position because he's got to come up over this rise, and he doesn't really want to be exposing the side cheek of the pike armour. Well, although at that angle it's not going to penetrate, but the T-150 could conceivably hit his lower glacis from there. And it's not so much the T-150, it's the other tanks that the T-150 is spotting for. There's the IS-3, for example. T-150's had enough. Let's see if we can get the IS-3, and let's take a look. You can see on the side cheek there, that's where the APCR went through, and it went through because at the time, and look at the hits on the gun mantlets. Who fires at the gun mantlet? I mean, seriously. Whoa, straighten the armour out, straighten the armour out. Good stuff. Didn't quite straighten it out as much as I would have liked, but good enough. And here we go. There's the reload of that 100mm gun. Far, far better than the reload on the IS-3. The T-150's done. It's just the IS-3 left. There's no reason to go out round the corner. You just have to wait for the T-69 to come up behind him, and bingo, there you go. Let's not take the risk. The BL-9 is a good gun, and it does have better penetration. Not by much, but it does have better penetration than this 100mm. The IS-3, it's not the kind of tank you want to underestimate. So, you know, if you're in the kind of position where the IS-3 can potentially one-shot kill you, it's always better to let somebody else get the kill than to take the risk. What have they got left? A Tiger and, oh, the AMX 5100. So, well, the Tiger was last seen defending the switchback road due east of the enemy base. And the AMX 5100 is obviously capping. I'll bet Mr. Storms is very glad of that 40km/h top speed now. It's another area where the 110 just has that slight edge over the IS-3. Not that the IS-3 is a bad tank, absolutely not. But I genuinely feel that the 110 is better. Not by much, but when you're better than a very good tank, that's certainly nothing to be ashamed of. Where's this 5100? AMX M4 struggling. Wonder if he's taken engine damage. The AMX M4 isn't a slow tank either. But you can see where the lack of power in the engine. I mean, this is not a slow tank by any stretch of the imagination, but it does weigh over 50 tons. And it does only have a 580 horsepower engine. The T-69's moved up. He hasn't spotted the guy yet. AMX, there he is. Go on, T-69. Good boy. Well done. Now there's just the Tiger. Now, one of the guys on the enemy team was saying that the Tiger was a bot, and his last reported position is all the way down there east of the enemy base. And they're saying that they should report him, and they're actually now telling us exactly where he is, which is a bit unfortunate. But they're convinced he's just botting it. So is that Tiger in the same position? Has he not moved from that edge of the map the entire game? Let's find out. It doesn't necessarily mean he is a bot. He could just be absolutely terrible. Stranger things have happened in World of Tanks, but let's find out, shall we? Now, if he is up there, frontal armour of the 110 is great, unless somebody's shooting down at you, in which case it's not. Yeah, there he is. Well, he's moving. Managed to hit him once. T-69's unloading into him. He seems to be aiming at the T-69. Second shot, yeah, no problem. He's killed the T-69. Tiger does have a very good rate of fire, but yeah, not good enough. So, let's take a look at the results. Won't come as a great surprise to anybody to see that he got a steel wall in that one, as well as the high caliber. Not too shabby at all. Over 12,000 WN8 rating from that match. Did well over 6,000 damage, but how much damage did he bounce? Well, potential damage received, 6,680. Got hit 24 times, mostly by 122mm guns, only 6 penetrations. Actually, only 3 of them penetrated. 3 of those hits just blew his tracks off, and 1 from splash damage. Presumably that was the Su-152 lofting a shell in his direction with its 152mm howitzer. So yeah, this is a pretty strong tank. And yet, I can tell some of you still aren't convinced. I can practically hear your keyboards going from here. Oh, Jingles, that wasn't impressive at all. Both of those games you were top tier, and in the second one there wasn't even any artillery. I'd like to see how somebody does in the 110 in a tier 10 match without a fully researched and upgraded tank, with the 122mm gun, with 175mm of penetration, and no gold ammunition. Alright, challenge accepted. There you go. How do you like them apples? I don't want you lot complaining that I don't give you what you ask for. There it is. That is pretty brutal matchmaking for a guy in a... Well, it's not a stock tier 8 heavy tank, because you're never going to drive a stock 110. You're always going to have the radio, the engine, and at least one of the guns carried over from the IS-2. But that's not much of a gun. This is Iron Blood. And look at what he's having to go through for your entertainment. So, let's just have a look. What's he got? There's an E100, an IS-7, a T-57 heavy, a 121, a Batchat, and 2 tier 10 artillery. And his gun has 175mm of penetration. Hoorah! Don't expect any kind of serious commentary in this replay, by the way. This one is purely for the shits and giggles. But it was a hell of an entertaining game to watch. Get a load of this. So, what have we got up front? Let's have a look. Both of the T-54s, the 121, the RU-251, who is just sitting in that bush. Oh, and he's taking a hit. But, oh, wow. He's taking another hit. Oh, wow. No damage. Hang on. What's going on? They've both hit his tracks. And somebody just bounced off him again. And, oh, there's the Batchat. And he's hit him as well. Well, okay, so... You know, if you have to be shooting at anything with a gun that has 175mm of penetration, you want it to be an RU-251 or a Batchat. There's actually a T-29 on the enemy team, by the way. He's actually a very, very good player, but he's going to need to be in a T-29 going into the city against tier 10 heavy tanks. And he's just nailed himself a T-54. What the hell is going on here? The enemy team didn't realise they were playing World of Tanks. They thought we were playing who can throw away their tier 9 and 10 medium tanks the fastest, and the T-54 won that one. Look at this guy in the 121. This guy's a unicorn player. He was on top of the hill. He chose to come down here in the middle of 3 enemy tanks. But he probably looked at the map and looked at what was left on his team and thought, screw it, we're done, I'm out of here. I'll just kill this Object 432 and get into the next game as quickly as possible. But he could have done more. He could have fallen back where he didn't have to worry about the lousy gun depression on his tank, where he could get shots into the lower glacis of tanks like Ironblood's 110 as he comes over the ridge and gets supporting fire from the T-30 who just bounced a shot off his gun mantlet, or the T-34 who just missed completely. But then again, they're about to be outflanked and surrounded, and there's the Batchat coming up behind them. The tier 9 medium on the other flank, yeah, they're done. Maybe that wasn't such a bad decision from the 121 after all. At least he doesn't have to put up with this for any longer. Oh, T30, T30, no, too slow. T34 is, of course, aiming straight at Iron Blood because he just wants to guarantee getting some damage done before he meets his inevitable fate. Look at this. It's like feeding time at the zoo. He was never going to get another shot off. Did I say T30? I meant T34. Or whatever. You know what I mean. Well, anyway, that's pretty much it for Iron Blood's contribution to this game. There's 3 enemy tanks left, but they're all in the town, and pretty soon there's going to be 2 enemy tanks, and then 1 enemy tank, and then no enemy tanks. But 2,600 damage in a 110 with a 122mm gun is not bad in the tier 10 game. It's certainly nothing to be ashamed of. Well, amusing though that was, but once all the smoke has settled, second class mastery badge? What the hell? Wargaming, what's going on? Iron Blood, I think you should be writing a very sternly worded letter of complaint to Wargaming and demanding at the very least a first class mastery badge out of that game. I feel that you have been cheated. Well, steady on there, Jingles. Cool your jets. I mean, yeah, it was amusing and it wasn't bad, but it was still only 2,600 damage. Yeah, well, it's better than anybody else in that match managed to do. Look at that. Tier 8 heavy tank with a 122mm gun, which only has 175mm of penetration, and he did more damage than anybody else on both teams. Yeah, I like this tank. So, Jingles, what do you think? 110, any good? Oh, it's rubbish. It's a terrible tank. It's utter... Well, shut up. Of course it's a good tank. Only joking. Yeah, this tank's fantastic. Just keep it pointed straight at the enemy guns. Try to keep the lower glaciers covered up. Hope they don't have any artillery. And if you're at close range and they're trying to snipe your commander's hatches, just keep the turret moving. And this thing's great. If they get around your sides and rear, you're toast, of course. But you're not in quite as bad a position as you might be in an IS-3 because you've got the DPM from that gun to beat off the opposition. It's a great tank in a face-to-face brawl. It's also a good flanking tank because it's got that 40km/h top speed. It's just a good all-round tier 8 heavy tank. It's one of my favourite tier 8 heavy tanks in the game. It's not something I ever thought I'd be saying about Chinese tanks because, well, you know, lousy gun depression. And yet, this thing, oh, it's great. So, there you go, the 110, Chinese tier 8 heavy tank. Fantastic piece of kit. Definitely recommend it. I'm sure you'll have fun driving this thing. Just, you know, once you get that top gun. Because playing with a 122mm D25T can be a bit of a grind. 59,000 experience to unlock the 100mm, but once you get that 100mm, this thing is gold. Hope you enjoyed the video, folks. Take care, and I'll catch you next time.